join us.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Committee. Thank you for asking us in today, and we appreciate the chance to testify before you in this room. I'm here today representing the Rutland County delegation, and as seen on the screen, I did submit a letter to your committee in the early part of April concerning the Slate industry and southwestern Vermont, the value that industry has toward the economic output of the county and the state. There are folks here who may or may not hear from all of you from the various towns officially representing the towns that can talk to you about the economic impact. We understand that the committee has some concerns with the slate industry, and we also, the county delegation also understands that there's, I'm hoping that we can come to some sort of an agreement amongst the committee and the industry that accomplishes the goals of the committee, but yet takes into consideration the industry and the folks in that family, basically a family-owned industry in Vermont that actually has a worldwide impact. Everybody's talked about a grandfather clause. I think maybe we should. I don't want to talk about that today, but I think there's a way to talk about that. And my letter gives you several bullet points, and I'm sure I won't take up a lot of your time today because I think it's more important that you hear from the groups of folks that are here. But the last paragraph of the letter, don't scroll down to that, I think would be helpful if the committee would consider setting up an off-session working group with a legislator from the area, obviously somebody from the committee, and who representatives from the industry to come to some sort of an agreement of what's doable, possible, and acceptable to everybody in this conversation. And I understand that you may not get the bill out this year, so that might be helpful. I don't know the mechanics of doing a working group without having legislation to form it. That's why you're the chair and I'm sitting on the same table. So.
I think I also just heard you volunteer for summer work.
I know what I do have a volunteer for that from that district.
Oh, all right.
His name might be Representative Helm. But I would be glad to do whatever would be assigned to me that you involved in that.
Right. So I think for the for you and also our guests, I would just say that what the committee has decided to do is to ask the NRB to convene that conversation, and it's great to know that you support that effort to kind of work over the summer to come to some resolution, and we support it too. So we're going to be asking the NRB to do that, take the lead and
Thank you. And I think you'll hear a little bit from the folks today about their concerns. I have a concern personally about what is a dormant quarry, and what does it mean to be dormant? Why is it dormant? You may or may not have heard this before. What type of regulations are necessary? What type of regulations do we have currently in place? And for me, what is quarry? What constitutes a quarry? And I think that's an important question that maybe the working group will have to delve into over the summer. But also in some of my conversations that we've had around the building and with these folks is, I think there's some education to do amongst the among the people selling real estate, that they understand what the responsibilities are for themselves, know what a dormant quarry is, and what can happen, could happen with a dormant quarry if you're selling a piece of property next to it. And I also understand that title searches typically only go back 40 years. Some of these quarries have been dormant, not used, we'll call them dormant, not used for over 40 years. So that's something that maybe working with could also address. So with that, Madam Chair, I will go do a land swap in my committee this morning. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. We need a new air handling system.
Let's see.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we are.
Thanks for making that. Wait, could you come back? All we want is the engineering.
We, have you actually talked to the airline guy?
Yeah, yeah, yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna circle back with you all.
Okay, good. We look forward.
Yeah.
Legislative speaker, come on in.
Yeah. Okay, great. We have Chris Smid up next. And we have two here on. We're going to give you the full half an hour, and then we have a request from one other to speak. So keeping in mind that we have 25 more minutes.
Understood. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Chris Smid. I work at New England Slate in Fulton, Vermont, and I speak this morning on behalf of many of the slate producers in western Rutland County. Slate's, as you know, Slate's played a tremendous role in the social and economic history of our region. The industry employed thousands and thousands of people during the late 1800s and early 1900s, drawing immigrants from across Europe. Today, between 300 and 400 people work directly with the slate industry, and with few exceptions, we are small family-run operations. We're not huge multinational corporations. The industry generates an estimated $40 million a year in sales. Almost all that comes from outside the state of Vermont, so we're bringing in fresh dollars into the Vermont economy. Vermont produces some of the highest quality slate in the world in a unique range of natural colors. It isn't 100% all natural real stone. It's still split one piece at a time by hand by hardworking, independent-minded folks. Roofing slate lasts over 100 years, a stark contrast to asphalt shingles or synthetic slates made from petroleum products, which end up in the landfill after 25 or 30 years. So in many ways, it's a very, very green product. We're currently doing a job in New Hampshire right now where the original slate was installed in 1876. It's being removed because the nails rusted, and 80% of the slate is still usable after that lifespan. So it's a very long-lived, very natural product. Can be used for flooring and wall cladding, structural pieces, and more. So just like maple syrup and Ben & Jerry's, Vermont is known for its world-class, all-natural, handcrafted slate and stone products. It's something we can all be proud of. The Slate Valley runs just over 20 miles from Castleton in the north to West Paulet in the south. There's only a mile or two wide. It's a very limited geographic extent. There are 300 to 400 quarry holes on more than 100 parcels that were registered with the District 1 office in the 1990s, as you're aware. This registration allowed quarries that were in existence prior to Act 250 to continue operating or to be held in reserve for future operations. Families and businesses have invested in these mineral assets. In many cases, quarries are considered a retirement plan, a nest egg, an inheritance that gets passed down from generation to generation. So members of the slate production community feel that changes to Act 250 that are in the proposed draft legislation would be severely detrimental to our business, to our industry, our local economy, and our communities. Recently, the announced closing of Green Mountain College in Poultney spurred a series of public meetings about the economic future of western Rutland County. Rightfully, much of the discussion focused on bringing new jobs, new economic drivers to the region. I suggest that we should also be looking at ways to protect and develop the few industries we already have. The working landscape of farming, forestry, and stone products is a critical part of our state, and it should not be regulated out of existence. Attracting remote workers is certainly a worthy goal, but Vermont needs a diverse economy to support its future health. Changes to Act 250's treatment of the slate industry may be appropriate, but they should be thoughtful and deliberate. It is our collective challenge to find that critical balance of economic and environmental consideration. To that end, my colleagues and I were discouraged by some of the language taken in the draft legislation, but we're very encouraged by the draft letter of April 5th requesting the formation of a stakeholder group. We welcome the opportunity to address the common goals of the region, the local process. We are optimistic that the concerns of neighbors can be addressed while still supporting the small businesses that form the fabric of our communities. While change is difficult, the proposed process is unfamiliar. We're hopeful the stakeholder group approach will yield the best possible results for all the parties involved. In closing, I'd like to thank members of this committee, the entire Rutland County delegation, the representatives from the towns and municipalities around us for all the work on this issue. And we are encouraged by the support of that draft proposal to create a working group and update Act 250 for the slate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
What's the appraised value of a quarry held in reserve?
It depends on what type of slate is in that quarry. and access and many other things, so it's hard to tell. It's a difficult asset to appraise.
If I wanted to come to grips with the economic loss, what
Mhm.
would happen in the event that you lost its exemption? What would I consider that quarry reserve to be worth?
So there's, that's a really good question. There could be some geologic testing that could be done to assess the in-ground mineral assets.
Well, you know, I'm just kind of looking for
yeah.
a general ballpark figure. If it feel
Yeah,
comfortable.
could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps more. So it depends on the location, the size of the parcel, the type of slate that's in there, but hundreds, thousands upwards.
I guess I would just add that, you know, permits don't mean that you're not operating,
Sure.
right? So permit means you're allowed to do what you're doing, but there's a conversation about how it gets done along the way. So I think
Thank you.
that's just a reminder that it doesn't, you know, increasing whatever, changing it won't shut it down.
Understood. Thank you for that. We agree. I think some of the concerns about the uncertainty of the permit process and what the stipulations would be. So I think the working group is a great way to have that conversation and perhaps allay some of those fears.
Great, and we share the interest in consistency and predictability. Representative Odie.
How many square miles did you say that all the quarries cover?
The valley runs about 20 miles north to south and might be roughly 2 miles wide. So, yeah, 1 to 2 miles. It meanders. There's the vein of Slate is a very discrete geologic formation. So in some areas it bows out, in some areas it pinches in. So, 2 times 20, 40 square miles would be a rough estimation.
Thank you.
Right.
Would you just tell the two towns on each end?
Castleton
Yes.
in the north. Some would argue Hubbardton is the very northern end of the Slate, but for most practical purposes, Castleton in the north on Lake Bombazine down to West Pollitt in the south.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Craig Markcrow. Oh, we heard from Craig before. Craig.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. So I
Welcome back.
thank you. I'm just
For the record.
don't have much to add to.
You could
to
just
the-
say your name. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Sorry. Craig Markcrow from Vermont Structural Slate. I don't have a whole lot to add to the PowerPoint presentation that I gave a few weeks ago, but wanted to respond to the letter that I saw discussing or proposing the study period and the study committee, and just wanted to respond to that letter today and say that we think it's a good idea. We're always happy to discuss our industry and show people what we do, and we look forward to that dialogue, and we think it's a good idea. I do want to thank, on behalf of the industry, the Rutland County delegation for its support in its letter, and also the Slate Valley town officials and select boards for its support. And we actually have letters of support from each and every town in the Slate Valley, which I'd like to submit today for the record. And can I ask the town officials and any Rutland County people who are here to stand up just so we can see? I'm not sure who's here.
Yeah, I'm Hal Wilkins. I represent Pollitt and West Pollitt.
I'm Terry Williams. I represent Pullman.
Frank Nelson. My ancestors were potato farmers in the area and stumbled onto Slate and got into the Slate business many generations ago. And the Planning Commission was started by my father.
What town are you from?
West Pollitt and Pollitt. Started by my father in the 1960s with a foresight to have sensible planning. They set up an industrial zone with the slate quarries being in the industrial zone with the intent of everybody knowing about this and that the slate industry was going to be operating as it was. Other industries as well are able to move into that area. And so this hasn't been, and this went through various planning revisions as well as unified bylaws without any opposition from any resident during any of those processes well over 50 years now.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Joe Gunter, I'm the town manager on the Fairhaven.
Fairhaven?
Fairhaven.
Great.
Mike Jones, the town manager in Castle.
So, I don't have much more to say other than we look forward to the process and I have a question. How will the makeup of that committee be determined?
Well, it's as yet to be determined, I think, specifically, so if you have input, now's the time to share with us.
Okay. I don't have any input, I'm just curious how it would be. I mean, I guess, obviously, there'd be some quarry representation, neighbor representation, town representation.
And the NRB will be convening a natural resources board.
So people directly involved with
Yes.
the issue.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then we have the gentleman who requested to be added.
Yes. My name is Richard Hill, and I'm from Greenstone, Slate. I also own a Slate quarry individually, Richard Hill, in New York State. I would like first to point out that I'm very much in favor of a working group. I think there's a lot of misinformation that's been presented by various witnesses, and I think that working with the group, getting together, actually looking at the ground would certainly take away a lot of the misunderstandings there. I would like to make one little point. It's kind of off the subject, but it was brought up in the last hearing by a couple witnesses about New York state laws. My quarries and my one quarry in New York is subject to an overall regulation by the state of New York, but it only comes in if you're a massive project. I don't know any slate quarry that has to, in New York State, that has to comply with like reclamation and all of those sorts of things. That's really the big operations that have to do that. And I know it was brought out a couple times by a couple witnesses in the last hearing that Vermont's different than New York. Vermont is much more restrictive than New York for slate quarries. I'm not saying about other operations, but for slate quarries. Unless there's been some change in the legislation just recently that I don't know about, that it's always been that way. That's all I have to say.
I think we're going to have a few questions for you because you can help us understand the New York situation. Representative Squirrel.
You said that there was a point at which there's regulation that occurs on the New York side. What is that?
It's cubic yards. It's massive amounts of.
What's the number?
My recollection is it's somewhere up around a million cubic yards of
a year.
A year taking out. It's huge.
So you said you're subject to it, but you're not because your quarry's not that big.
I think if we grow to do that, then we would probably have to comply. But at the level that we are, and at the level that most quarries in Vermont operate, they wouldn't be.
So your quarry in New York is active?
It's, once again, it's a reserve quarry. You know, we use it. Some years we need it, and some years we don't. And I think that's another thing that a study group would find, that it's you don't always work all your quarries all the time. So if you don't have reserves, then you're going to, somewhere down the road, you're going to be in serious problem, and that will then just reverberate in your own business and in the number of employees you have, and in the area. And I think that if quarries can't keep their reserves, they really don't have much of anything, and I think it's going to be massive losses of jobs. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will, because at some point you've got to go back to your reserves.
Representative Morgan.
Is your New York quarry near the Vermont border?
Yeah, it's right. You know, it's within half a mile.
What town is that?
It's in Granville.
But I that, and wondering, we've heard different perspectives on the slate industry in New York, right across the border. Can you give us a sense of the scope and scale of that industry in New York, on the New York side?
Well, once again, I think it's smaller because the geology is quite different. I've got a geological map back in my office that shows how the slate it does run over into New York State. It's not nearly as extensive as it is in Vermont, and the chemical substance of the slate is different slightly, and it has different qualities to it. It makes much better, for example, flagstone, and it doesn't make most of it doesn't make real good roofing material. But it's but almost all the quarries in New York are just worked on a needed basis, But that's the way. That's the quarry business in general. That's you don't go to one quarry and work your whole life there. You have to work from quarry to quarry to get the material that you need for a particular order, because most roofing slate orders are multicolored and may come from numerous quarries.
How much slate does Greenstone extract in a year?
How much? I can tell you a rough state, dollar-wise or squares, square-wise. What do you say, John, square-wise?
25,000 squares.
About 25,000.
But there's no correlation to weight. So we may take out
Yeah, what's a square? Square what?
a 10 by 10 area of coverage.
What is it in cubic yards?
10 by 10.
That's the terminology that's used a lot. Cubic yards.
But cubic yards does not apply to us. And unfortunately, you're extracting a stone. And I'm John Hill. I run our mine and run our office. So basically, a cubic yard is something that aggregate would use. We're not aggregate. We're dimensional stone. So a cubic yard of dimensional stone may be 2 rocks. Make a cubic yard, makes nothing because the stone is no good. Otherwise, you can extract the stone and maybe a 10-foot long stone, it's a foot thick, divide that area by 1/4 inch, that's how much we have to sell. So it's really quite hard to put a number on, like I can extract, 4 cubic yards and make a square slate. This week I may extract 4 cubic yards and make a square slate. Next week I can extract 25 and not make a square, because the stone changes. So it's really, we had the office, Howard, excuse me, we had the Act 250 people come down and see what goes on. And they basically, in the 90s, were like, you guys do this? We do not, we couldn't imagine it. So it's totally foreign to the stone industry compared to aggregate. So I'm kind of being short with you, but I don't really have an answer. We would love to have you come down and show you.
Okay, a couple more questions, Representative Faber, and then Squirrel.
Do you know of any slate quarry that's been depleted? Depleted, yes.
Any quarry that's been depleted?
Yes. Close, in other words.
Yeah, we have a quarry that we think is pretty well depleted. It's pretty rare, but yes, we have one, and yes.
So it's not common in the industry
No.
to mine it out, so to speak.
No, with most of the quarries, with changes in technology and changes in business and so forth, the quarries, a lot of the quarries have been gone back and worked, yes. And I mentioned about it in my last testimony. My dad bought some land in the 1960s, and I bought it from him, and we've been holding it. We think that there's some pretty good slate there, but we've had other quarries that we could work, but those quarries are getting worked down, so we are probably gonna have to dip into our reserves to keep going in the future.
Representative Squirrel.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to this cubic yard measurement. I'm not sure what happens in Vermont, but I know in New York, I think in order to get permits, depending on what the level of extraction is, it's still based on cubic yards. You have to do that measurement to get the permit. I understand your point that the finished product may not be everything you're extracting, but I think from our perspective, it's the total of the extraction that's taking place, not necessarily the finished product.
Well,
Okay?
that could well be, but that was my point too, is that to open the criteria for regulation, it doesn't apply to small quarries. Would probably never apply to a slate quarry like you have in Vermont. The amount is huge. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to look it up or anything.
My understanding is in New York, anything over 750 cubic yards per year requires a permit.
I think it's a lot more than 750.
Well, that's what information I have. So.
No, 750 cubic yards is minuscule. That's,
yeah, I'll double check. That's information I have.
All right, Representative Dolan and then Morgan.
Good morning. My question is about the byproduct, the mountains or piles, and interested to know a couple of things, if I may. One is, what are the barriers to try to manage that byproduct? That is the stone that has been accumulating and piling up. Interested to know what the barriers are in terms of crushing or processing or finding another market for that stone product. And then the second question is, we too are concerned and care about the long-term economic viability of the region, both for the quarry industry, but also for the communities as well. So reclamation is oftentimes an important element to ensure that the landscape is well managed to attract businesses, attract families, and help to ensure the vitality of the region. So interested to know, and perhaps this will be a topic of the working group, how your perspective is and how to provide some degree of reclamation to help support the long-term viability of the region. So the two questions are, what are the barriers on terms of managing the stone material that's the byproduct of quarrying, and the second is the degree to which some reclamation will help ensure or support the economic vitality, like your response to that.
well, I think to answer your first question, I think the barrier is transportation. I don't think this is my personal opinion, I don't think that there would be any, you're talking about the waste matter. If we were closer, 100 miles closer to a major metropolitan area, I think all that stuff would be done. I mean, it's all very usable material. Right now, it's just too expensive to get it to the market. And you know, but we're seeing it, the market grow, and there have been some plans to get the crushed stone, to crush it and sell it in the major areas. The reclamation, I was talking to we had a site visit by the Army Corps of Engineers, and we were talking about reclamation, and of course they're thinking this stuff out. They haven't thought this out completely, so I don't want to put words in their mouth. But they were saying that these holes with water in them could well be a tremendous asset in the future. And they haven't come to any real conclusion of that, but I think they're thinking it over, that maybe it's not a good idea to start refilling these holes with this beautiful fresh water in it. And most of the water is just pristine, you can drink it. And so I don't know that I don't know that that really answers your question. I don't know that there is an answer to your question. I think there's kind of an assumption that maybe it, these slag piles hurt the area. Tourist-wise, I don't know. One of our biggest draws in the area is the Slate Museum, the Slate Valley Museum, and tours around to these old slate companies. I know in Europe, I've been in Wales, and they have, that's a massive industry over there. The quarries are pretty well worked out in Wales, but they have, they have a lot of these reserves there that are in these old quarries there that they, and they have a national, it's a national museum. We don't give, I'm not complaining about Vermont, the Vermont government. We don't get much help down there. We don't get help as far as museums. We get, I know the towns and everybody do the best they do on the roads. It's not like, I've been to Spain, and in Spain, the government, first of all, I back off, the deposits of slate in Spain are way up in the mountains, up in the northwest corner. And the government of Spain subsidizes roads to those quarries. They subsidize electricity. They put in power plants and so forth. They even built a railroad into their quarries. And I don't think we should expect that, and I'm not saying, but we don't get a lot of help. I think there's a lot of help that we could do for our area in the tourist industry using the slate assets, using the slate history. And if I would suggest anybody is really interested, go down to the Slate Valley Museum. It's in New York.
All right, we have to wrap up. Lee Moore, okay. And so one final question, Representative McCullough.
This actually is for Craig, and I may have missed, but Craig, is there a representative here from the town of Pollitt?
Yes.
Yes. Two of them. And have they identified themselves as Pollitt?
Pollitt, West Pollitt.
Yeah, you did. Pollitt. I meant Green Mountain College and
Pollitt. Yep.
Yeah.
He's here.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming in. Yes.
I have the wheat. I'm doing some quick math. So we would extract 45,000 tons.
For the record, remind us who you are.
I'm Jonathan Hill, Greenstone Slate. And we are probably the largest producer of roofing slate products. Not structural, not flooring, just roofing. And that's 45,000 tons a year.
Oh, thank you. And then there was one more, Craig. Did you have your, no.
Kurt McCormick used to be chair of this committee.
Can you say for the record your name, please?
My name is Charles Brown, Brown's Quarried Slate. Kurt McCormick chaired this committee years ago, and when they did the last study committee, and when it passed, when he brought it back, that was a Republican Democratic mix they came down and did it all. And when they brought it back and put it together, to build together, which we are going under, the roadmap that they made for us back then, they passed in the House 147-3, and in the Senate 29-1, and then Governor Dean signed it. So Kurt McCormick, I believe he's still in the House now. I think it would be very good for your committee to bring him in and let him talk to you and explain everything that they did, because that was a 12 to 18 month study that they did.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
We're moving on to the next item on our agenda, but thank you all so much for coming in.
Just push it. It's a push? Yeah. Felt like I'm gonna break it.
Push all right.
You guys are all looking spiffy today. Thought you were retired.
Heading back. Yeah, we've got some people to visit with, but then we'll be back.
Let me know next, if you end up back up here, let me know, we can grab coffee or
Yeah,
lunch.
that'd be great. Yeah, awesome. See you, Greg.
Done with 250? Done with 250 for the day? Yeah, but now they're gonna do plastic. Oh, yeah, how's that coming along? And I had heard this somewhere else about how these microplastics transfer studied up in like remote areas of the French Alps. And they actually had sands almost that they filtered particulates from the air. Even microparticulates are smaller than you can see with the human eye. They're like 40 microns. And where are they coming from? It's an air It's an air pollution issue. Because we want to polyester, the microfilms, for instance, the miracle of taking the soda bottles and turning them into Patagonia, Patagucci, and then we put it in a clothes dryer and we pump those microparticulates in the air. And we'll find animal flesh, our flesh, fish flesh, everywhere, and they actually came to the calculation in a ton of atmospheric deposition. Very nice to meet you.
I'm admiring your
That would take intelligence. I left that plant behind years ago.
You need a couple more cups of coffee.
I had too many joints when I was young.
Have you ever been to the liver shop?
Did you,
Yeah, I got
did you
there,
see the
this was 100 years ago.
new